Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I am pleased to be with Bryan Young, author of many books and other things for many different places. Bryan, thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure.
So the first question I have for you is about the different styles of writing you've done. You were the former editor-in-chief of Big Shiny Robot. You currently write for Slash Film, and so that's kind of more the nonfiction type side of things. But now you also are getting into writing novels, whether it's Battletech or other universes. Mm-hmm. So how does that part of the writing style work for you?
They take very different parts of the brain, but both parts of the brain I really enjoy going and exercising. Mm-hmm. I started writing the nonfiction stuff sort of as a complement to the stuff I was doing in the world of film. I was doing documentary film, and I was doing a lot of the marketing and promotion, and needed to do press releases and stuff. And I kept trying to get some outlets to run press releases about the movies we were doing, and they were like, "No, we're not going to let you do that, but do you want to just come write for us, and then we'll put a little thing at the bottom that says about your film?" And I was like, "Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to do that." And, I was writing about politics mainly at that point.
Yeah.
And decided I wanted to write about stuff I really wanted to write about, which was nerd stuff. So we did Big Shiny Robot. And it's fun. Like, doing critical analysis of things is really fun. It's taught me so much about storytelling in general. But I always had my foot in both those worlds, with fiction and nonfiction, and I don't look at them as actually all that separate, even though they really are, because what you're doing is you're trying to communicate a story to someone. And sometimes that story is a big existential, multi-thread, multi-POV novel, and sometimes that story is, I really like this movie,
right?
And if you like this movie, you might like this other movie, and here's some film techniques that come from history, or, you might like this book, or whatever it is I'm writing about. And really it's me communicating through words to an audience, and so really the length is the biggest thing, right? I can do a lot less with 700 words. I can make people feel more complicated things with 70,000.
Yeah. And when you do the writing that's the nonfiction side of the more reporting, have you found that helped you with the industry, whether it was making connections and getting to ask authors and to talk with authors? Did that help shape the way you would write later on?
Absolutely, actually. It put me in contact with people that really helped me. Actually, as we're recording this, we're in a hotel room at DragonCon doing interviews. And the first time I met Mike Stackpole was in a hotel room at DragonCon with me interviewing him for Big Shiny Robot. And that was the beginning of a friendship with Mike, where he really started mentoring me. And it wasn't long after that he encouraged me to... I'd written a book. I'd been sending it around, and Mike took a look at it, and he was like, "Hey, this is where you're going wrong. Here's how you get it out, and then I'll get you an invitation to this other con." And then that's how I met Aaron Alston and Timothy Zahn and like a lot of the Star Wars authors, because I was working in the Star Wars space as a journalist, and they really helped me in a lot of ways. Aaron, my fourth book that I wrote, and the third that got published, Aaron went through and made me rewrite it a few times, because he was really angry that I didn't get it right, because Aaron Alston, who, if you're familiar with, New York Times bestselling Star Wars author, him and Mike used to say that their big thing was that they wanted to mentor writers so that they would shape them into the sort of writers that would write the stuff that they enjoyed reading.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so, like doing that journalism stuff put me in contact with those guys, and both Aaron and Mike and Tim, although Tim's a little bit more aloof, have been really just terrific mentors over the course of all of this. And I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have been able to do that without that entryway into Star Wars, or into... I wouldn't have that entryway into... through nonfiction without that.
Yeah, that I have listened to Mike talk a lot about the business of writing.
Yeah.
And more than most other authors, he knows the ins and outs of, what it's like doing multiple drafts. He knows how to shop things around. And so whenever just listening to him, he imparts a lot of wisdom. So I can imagine knowing him well would do that too.
Yeah. No, I learned something from Mike every time we hang out.
Yeah. So I wanted to first start with one of your books called Lost at the Con, which is very apt that we're at a convention. I am going to guess that you, some of the parts of the book were inspired by your times at conventions.
They were definitely inspired by my times at convention, but specifically Dragon Con.
Yeah.
I went to that first Dragon Con I went to. I'd been covering Star Wars in nonfiction for a long time, and I'd written some short stories about the absolutely bizarre things I'd seen at Dragon Con, because there is no other convention like Dragon Con. There's just nothing like it. And that was when the idea for that book sparked, where it was like, what if I put like a Hunter S. Thompson character in the middle of a science fiction and fantasy convention like Dragon Con? And the book wrote itself very quickly. But yeah, it was very much my experience for my first couple of years at Dragon Con. But I've been going to San Diego Comic-Con for a long time, and so there were some things from there that sort of made its way in, and I just had a lot of fun with that book. And it was Mike who sat me down and said, like, you're gonna have a problem finding an agent with this book. It's not because it's bad; it's just they don't know where to put it on a shelf.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. What genre do you put it in? It's a tough thing.
I would say it's a comedy. Right? And comedy is such a broad genre. It's not like you can go to the bookstore. The
comedy section.
There's not like a comedy section. It's in fiction, but it looks and it has the vibe of that genre fiction. So, and it's not a graphic novel, but it has that cartoony sort of vibe to it. And so, Mike was right. There was no way a publisher was going to go, I know where to put this on a shelf. But Mike had the presence of mind to tell me, like, you're going to all these conventions, get tables and sell them. And I've sold so many copies of that book and signed so many copies of that book at conventions and conferences across the country. And people just seem to like it. I'm glad.
There's a universality to it, specifically among convention people, whereas sometimes if you write a science fiction or fantasy novel, you have to, like, win them over. They already know what this is like. And so it's not just you who has the experience, it's the audience, so they can easily relate to the characters. With that, you've also written other books, specifically recently in the BattleTech universe.
Yeah.
You've written, I think, how many is it now? I had my last count of 3.
Are we talking written or published? Because those are different numbers too.
Either one.
So I've had 2 full-length novels.
2 novels.
And a collection of novellas and countless short stories. And I've been doing some fiction for some of the game material. So, like, if you buy the Alpha Strike box set, it's got a novella that I wrote in it. And some of the books that are coming up soon are going to have some short stories of mine in it. And I've turned in another book, and I'm on contract for yet another one in the BattleTech universe, and I'm working on a Shadowrun novel as well.
How does that universe work compared to some of the other universes? You have something like Star Wars, where they have a story group. The IP is very much controlled, and they bring in the authors, but they control it. Or some other IP where they're just, they bring in people and you have more free reign. Or do you collaborate with the other BattleTech authors like Mike?
Yeah, no, so it's a little bit more like Star Wars. I mean, BattleTech's obviously a smaller operation than Star Wars. Yep. Everything is a smaller operation than Star Wars. But they have a fact-check team. They have sort of an editorial group over it where there's a line developer, a guy named Ray Arastia, and the executive editor, and John Helfers. And they, BattleTech's sort of constantly working on a document where it's like, we want to take the universe this far into the future as we go. And, every few years they have a summit with a bunch of the writers. And I was really fortunate enough to participate in the summit this year. And it was me and Mike Stackpole and Jason Schmetzer and Michael Ciravella and a few of the other BattleTech writers, and Phil Lee, the editor of the Shrapnel magazine. And along with Lauren Coleman, the owner of Catalyst, and Randall Bills, who was a former line developer, but we hashed out the next couple of years of stories, and we've done a lot of collaborating. It's amazing how much communication and chat rooms and stuff have helped with that. So I'll have one of the game developers email me and say, hey, I heard you're doing something on X planet. Here's the game material that we're getting ready to publish about this. Does anything you wrote conflict? Does anything you wrote need to change? Does anything we wrote need to change? And how do we do that back and forth? It's not as they don't have the resources Star Wars has. I've got a lot of experience working with guys in the story group, helping them do some stuff. And I used to write for the StarWars.com website for a long time. And one of my friends who used to edit that went on to the story group. And having helped friends that have worked on Star Wars material, having gone through the story group and stuff, it's very similar where, you'll get notes and they'll say, this is right for the universe and this isn't. Mm-hmm. But Battletech is pretty locked down insofar as, like, what's going on. But Battletech's also rare in that, like, anyone who's a fan has an opportunity to submit stories through Shrapnel, which is the magazine, which is, people will say, like, oh, I don't like the fact that it's a, X amount of time, wait list to get my story looked at Shrapnel. But for, a franchise as big as Battletech to be able to just submit without an agent or any, background at all, and to actually have a chance to get it published in the franchise is a really big deal. There are people who would murder younglings to have that sort of pipeline in Star Wars, right?
And in Star Trek, back in the 80s and 90s, they had the free submission where you could submit to the slush pile, but they only ever bought one every couple of years. Yeah. So it was, and now they don't even do it for the shows or the books. Yeah. So the fact that they actually have the ability for fans to potentially write in, that is a great opportunity. Yeah, but no, the collaboration with the other writers is actually something I really love. It's a really great group of folks writing right now, and everyone's just a fan of each other's work, and you'll see the universe. The Battletech universe kind of had some problems as far as the narrative line because it kept switching hands with companies. Mm-hmm. And now everything's really unified and everything's kind of heading in the same direction and everybody's on the same page working on it. It's just such a pleasure. Now, when you go to write a Battletech novel, do they approach you on the general idea and then you write the novel, or do you approach them more like with your experience so far? It depends. With my last Battletech novel that got published, A Question of Survival, that was them saying, here's this story point, we'd really like to get your take on it. How would you make this work? Yeah. And it was actually DragonCon 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. DragonCon seems to be the place, apparently. Yeah. At DragonCon 2 years ago, the line developer and I had a meeting, and we just kind of spitballed out how the book was going to work and what I would like to do to bring to the table. So I brought something to the table with the parameters they gave me. But that collection of novellas was, it's called Foxtails. Mm-hmm. And that was me just going like, this is what I want to see in Battletech. And I sent it to them and I said, here's the first novella. I've got 5 more I want to write. Let's do that. And they were like, okay. So it can work both ways. Switching gears from writing for a moment into something that I really enjoy, which is your Full of Sith podcast. Oh. That podcast, for me, has been impactful because it was one of the first. It and Coffee with Kenobi were the ones I started listening to. And that was years ago. And you guys just celebrated your 10th anniversary. Yeah. And so what has it been like to have it over 10 years? And has it had a big impact in your other parts of your career, or has it been not as impactful? So I think it has been impactful because it definitely puts me in contact with people, and I have relationships with people that I wouldn't necessarily have without the outlet of the podcast. But the podcast over the years, even with all of the changes in co-hosts and stuff, that we've had over the years, the primary focus has been to just have an hour every week to nerd out about Star Wars with friends. And to be honest, like right now, Holly Fry, who's my current co-host now, it's really just us talking.
and talking about Star Wars in a way that we love it, and I kind of forget sometimes that we're recording it. And it's weird that it's been 10 years, because, people will come back up to me and say, like, I've been listening to the back catalog. And when you think about 10 years, that's before Force Awakens came out, by a lot, and by 2 years. And, going back and listening to the predictions we had and all the consternation about what was happening and all of the Star Wars drama over 10 years and 5 movies and, Clone Wars was still going when we started the show. So, like, it's been a really interesting journey to be able to track it and see the guests that we had on and the books we covered. And it's just a really interesting document of Star Wars from a fan perspective, but also from a professional fan perspective because we do tons of interviews.
Yes.
And I've been really grateful to be able to talk to so many people who've worked in Star Wars, from George Lucas and Rick McCallum to Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau to, even all the way down to guys like Mike Stackpole.
Yeah.
No.
Well,
no,
I don't think he would.
I would say that to his face.
Yes, he would jab you back, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Of all those, I know there's a ton. Do you have a personal favorite episode? One that I know that's out of 600 something, that's tough, but...
There's a few. One that we did that I really enjoyed was a collaboration with Star Wars Explained, where, for the longest time at StarWars.com, I was writing the Cinema Behind Star Wars column.
Yeah.
And which has kind of moved over to Slash Film when I have time to write it. But we did, Star Wars Explained and I did sort of a co-episode where I had a 25 or a 30-minute version of a podcast where I explored John Ford's influence on Star Wars. Mm-hmm. And Alex sort of cut a 10 or 12-minute version of that for Star Wars Explained with my narration. And that was a favorite. Roger Ebert's passing, that episode was a favorite. I'm really proud of that episode because Roger Ebert really taught me how to, just through his writing, not personally or anything, teach me how to examine stories, how to critique stories, how to meet stories on their own terms, and getting to explore that, even through the tragedy of his passing was... a really good episode. It seems like people dying make really good episodes, when Aaron Alston passed away.
Yes, I do remember that one.
I had Mike and Janine Spenlove, who's another Star Wars author. She came on and we talked about that. And Janine was another friend, like when Richard LeParmentier died, who was Admiral Motti in Star Wars. And so some of those were really, really fun. Just it's just all fun. I don't know, but those are I think a few of the highlights.
If I can talk about some highlights for me, one was the Why We Killed Chewie episode.
Oh yes,
that was a great. Not just because it was super entertaining with the people in the hall with what they had to say, but there are so many people that I know who are reading the New Jedi Order, and they had feelings about it. And I said, "You gotta listen to this. You gotta listen to this." And there's so many people like. Mike was on the team. Mike was okay with it, and like they didn't realize how planned out this was and everything that went into it. And you guys asked great questions, and the audience did, and it made great podcasts.
I gotta say, Why We Killed Chewie was my idea to program at Salt Lake Comic-Con, what was then Salt Lake Comic-Con, because they had Mike and Bob Salvatore coming to the show, and I was like, we got to trust me. I've talked to Mike enough about this to know we're going to get interesting stories. And I think to this day, if I had to pick top 5 panels, podcast episodes, or conversations or whatever that I've been able to be privy to, it was that one, because it was so... You just don't understand what was going on behind the scenes, not only with why they made the choice to kill Chewie, which is totally understandable when Mike Stackpole and Bob Salvatore explain it to you, but what was going on in Bob's personal life at the time, and the way fandom was interacting with him about it, it really changed my view of how I should be interacting with creators of things that I really love.
And I've had the same reaction because I try, even if I dislike a project, to be very careful about attacking an author personally, not just because of things like that where there was personal stuff going on in their life, but it's also because you want to be professional. You want to be respectful of people, and so it's the go after the art, not the artist.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I think a lot of that idea that I had was shaped by that podcast because it was very eloquent the way that he talked about it and everyone else did.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of there's a lot of extra episodes that you probably don't need to listen to, but I think there's a lot of gems in the 600 episodes or whatever we've done that there's a lot of gems worth going back and looking for.
On the opposite side, have you just had some weeks where you're just like, man, we have nothing to talk about, and I know there's some character deep dives ones that you've done, but I wasn't sure if those were pre-planned or if those fell into those.
For the last, I'll tell you, for the last year maybe, Holly and I have just been so busy with day job work and writing that our planning hasn't been up to the level that I'd like it to be, and I always kind of hit that level where it's like, are we going to have an hour to talk about it? And we always fill it. There's never a problem. As soon as Holly and I start, there's never an issue with it. But sometimes we're scraping our minds going what are we talking about this week? Especially right now, Holly and I are pretty adamant, we're not going to cover any of the new shows until the strike is over. So we just did an episode on our favorite merchandise, so we're trying to come up with stuff where we don't have to necessarily put that out there because I really want the studios to just end the strike.
That's a good point. Yeah. That's has that affected your work at Slash Film, the strike?
No. So the way the guilds have talked about it is they've said if you're a critic, if you're a reviewer, if you're someone whose job depends on reviewing this content, we're not going to count any strikes against you. Because one day I would like to be in the Writers Guild. I would like to write TV and movies and whatnot and have. But as a professional, doing that professionally, that's not anything. And I am still covering that for Slash Film, and my coverage is coming out regularly. So
okay, yeah, I know that was a very difficult needle to thread for a lot of people because there are some people in the guild who are technically members, but they also do reporting as well, and so they were in a very precarious position. So.
Yeah, but the way Holly and I kind of looked at it was that's part of my job over there. That's part of my income and my livelihood. And the podcast is not. The podcast is just for fun. So we'll just have fun. And when it's done, we're going to have the best group of episodes dissecting everything that's come out during the strike that you can imagine.
Well, thank you so much for doing this interview with me. Do you have any upcoming books to plug right now?
So right now, just coming out now in digital and coming out in print soon is the Robotech Homefront role-playing game supplement. I co-wrote the Robotech the Macross Saga role-playing game, and I was part of the team that put together this sequel that covers Season 2 and Season 3. It just hit digital, and it's coming out in physical soon. It just depends on the printers, and things in publishing are really weird with printing. But I wrote 2 short stories in there and a whole bunch of the scenarios and a lot of the background fiction in the book. And then sometime in the first quarter of 2024, I've got a new Battletech book coming out called Without Question that is a sequel to A Question of Survival, which was the last Battletech I wrote. So hopefully it's approachable for new readers. I really tried to write it with that in mind, but you'll definitely have a better time with it if you go back and read some of the other stuff.
Gotcha. Well, thank you so much for doing this, and until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.